During the Great War of 1914 to 1918, more than 12,000 Newfoundlanders would join the fight against Germany and serve with distinction. But just a small group of these Newfoundlanders would take on the challenge of mastering a new, unproven weapon of war. A weapon so revolutionary, it had been unthinkable just a decade earlier. This is the story of Newfoundland's first combat pilots.
Episode 1. The First Recruits.
In the center of the capital city of Newfoundland, St. John's, sits an impressive architectural structure. Known as the Rooms, it is the largest cultural facility on the island. I've come here today to speak with retired Professor Dr. Mike Deal. Mike has done extensive research on the early aviation history of Newfoundland and Labrador, and in particular on the young pilots who enlisted in World War I.
Well, we're currently at the Rooms Museum, and we're looking at a display on World War I aviation, which is part of the 100th anniversary of World War I. And this is a small exhibit dedicated to aviation, and it's focused on one of the Newfoundland pilots that served in the First World War, named Ronald Ayre. And it includes a photograph of Ayre and a painting of an aircraft that he might have flown.
In 1915, the airplane was still a new technology, and its benefits for war had been quickly recognized. The only question now was how to get them.
In January 1915, two London-based organizations, the Overseas Club, representing Britons throughout the Commonwealth, and the Patriotic League, representing Britons in foreign countries, approached the War Office and Royal Naval Air Service, RNAS, with an offer to collect donations from their members to finance the formation of an Imperial Air Flotilla. Royal Flying Corps, RFC, drew up a price list of suitable aircraft, and it was agreed that each donor would receive a photograph of the donated aircraft, with their name prominently displayed. Under the management of the two patriotic organizations, the fund contributed over £1 million and supplied over 600 presentation aircraft and operating funds for a hospital for wounded RFC officers.
Despite tough economic times, Newfoundland was one of the first members of the Commonwealth to respond to the fund drive.
The elected executive of the Aeroplane Committee included W.G. Gosling, chairman, J.A. Clift, treasurer, and C.R. Steer, secretary, while the total number of members was 69. A subcommittee consisting of the executive, along with R.B. Job, A.B. Maureen, J.C. Hepburn, and W.F. Lloyd, was formed to get the subscription underway. The committee urged that this matter be taken up promptly by every true and loyal patriot, and promised that donations would be acknowledged in the daily papers. Thereafter, both the Evening Telegram and the Daily News ran almost daily updates on the Aeroplane Fund donations and totals. Both J.A. Robinson, editor of the Daily News, and W.F. Lloyd, editor of the Evening Telegram, were members of the committee. The committee canvassed the larger firms on Water Street, as well as societies, labor unions, and manufacturers. Printed circulars and posters were also prepared and sent to the outports.
Hundreds of Newfoundland villages scattered all around the island would take up the cause and donate scarce and hard-earned cash.
In the original appeal, the aeroplane is referred to as the Eagle Eye for the troops, which recognizes the early role of aircraft primarily for the surveillance of enemy troop movements. There were two aircrew categories, pilots and observers. The observer's primary task was to assess what was going on below and report back to officers on the ground, while the pilot flew the aircraft and took evasive action against enemy aircraft and ground anti-aircraft fire. Both pilots and observers were trained in the use of machine guns, which were mounted on their aircraft. In practice, there were many types of pilot and observer, depending on the type of aircraft and their roles, and specialized courses were developed for each group. G.W.L. Nicholson, in his book The Fighting Newfoundlander, notes that the Newfoundlanders were much impressed with the work of the Royal Flying Corps, for despite continuous anti-aircraft fire and frequent attack by hostile planes, they stuck to their task of photographing and collecting data to be overprinted on the latest intelligence maps to be issued before the big offensive.
The aircraft fund had been a huge success, and on the 4th of August 1915, airplanes Newfoundland No. 1, Newfoundland No. 2, and Reid, Newfoundland were formally presented to the Royal Flying Corps.
In England, lists of donor names were sent to aircraft factories, and these were added to the machines as they came off the production line. The use life of these early aircraft was often only a few months. As promised, when a presentation aircraft was struck off charge, the name was assigned to another aircraft. In the RFC records, struck off charge could indicate that the aircraft had been shot down, damaged, or wrecked by enemy action, or wrecked in a flying accident. It could also mean that the aircraft was replaced because it was an obsolete model or rebuilt after a crash. Obsolete and rebuilt aircraft were often reassigned as trainers. The 5 Newfoundland aircraft designations lived on throughout the war. For example, the name Newfoundland No. 1 appeared on 7 different aircraft, and Newfoundland No. 2 appeared on 9 different aircraft. Early in 1917, a Commonwealth training facility for pilots was established in Ontario. Several of the Newfoundlanders who joined the RFC/RAF received their initial training in this program. Cadets began their training at Depot, Given Street School, Toronto, for 2 weeks, including drills, personal hygiene, physical fitness, and military discipline. This was followed at No. 4 Cadet Wing, Long Branch, by 8 weeks of drill, exercises and athletics, military discipline and law, aerial navigation, use of Aldous signal lamp, and wireless skills. Next, it was Aeronautical School, University of Toronto, for 4 weeks, followed by exams. Here they learned about the theory of flight, meteorology, astronomy, engines, rigging, wireless, artillery observation, instruments, bombs, and machine guns. At camps near Deseronto, 43 Training Wing, they received flight training. The goals were 10 hours of solo flying, plus 30 landings, a climb to 3,000 feet, and landing in a circle 40 yards, 36.6 meters in diameter, as well as mastering the Lewis and Vickers machine guns, i.e. assembling, disassembling, and fixing jams. The next phase involved 6 subject areas: wireless, artillery code, sending on silence key, and Pano signaling, flying and sending map coordinates, and air training. At Camp Borden, 42 Training Wing, they received advanced flight training in formation flying, bombing, artillery observation, and aerial machine gunnery, aerial photography, and cross-country flying. Finally, the cadet moved on to the School of Aerial Gunnery at Beamsville, near Hamilton, where he had to complete 30 hours of solo flying, successfully simulate a forced landing, and climb to an altitude of 8,000 feet. After this intensive 4-month program, they spent another 8 months in England to cover the same training on frontline aircraft.
With Newfoundland's aircraft secured and safely delivered overseas, it was time to get them off the ground and into battle.
Howard Reid had the distinction of being the first Newfoundlander to join an Allied Air Force, as well as being the youngest officer in the Royal Naval Air Service. He was one of 2 enlisted sons of W.D. Reid, president of the Reid Newfoundland Company. He arrived in England with the Newfoundland Regiment in 1915, but soon transferred to the Royal Naval Air Service. He received his aviator's certificate on September 8, 1915, on a Maurice Farman biplane and was soon attached to No. 2 Wing of the Eastern Mediterranean operation at Gallipoli. Along with pilots of No. 3 Wing, he was involved in aerial reconnaissance, artillery assistance, and bombing raids. More than 100 seaplanes and aeroplanes were used in the Gallipoli campaign, and during the eventual military evacuation, the naval pilots kept up an all-night bombing raid in order to exhaust and distract the Turkish artillery crews. In October 1916, Howard and 4 other pilots were sent from their base on Imbros Island to Bucharest to assist the Romanian army against the Central Powers. 2 months later, Bucharest fell, and the flyers escaped.
When he got back to England, he was sent on leave, and he went to visit his family in Newfoundland. By March of that year, he had been transferred to the Royal Flying Corps Canada in Ontario, and he stayed there for the rest of the war. According to his service record, he was part of a British aviation delegation to the United States in July 1918. And by February, he was promoted to captain and eventually an administrative captain. So at some point he left the Air Force because by 1921 he was living back in St. John's. And then we don't hear much from him again until 1939 when he moves to England. And he stays there until 1947 when he died. So he was eventually buried in the UK.
Howard Reid, the young boy from St. John's, Newfoundland, who when he was growing up loved sports, motorcycles and cars, would be remembered in Newfoundland aviation history as a true pioneer and World War I hero.
Ronald Henderson Ayre was the first Newfoundlander to be decorated while in air service. He was born in April 1898 in St. John's to a prominent merchant family. He graduated from Methodist College, St. John's, and attended Leys School, Cambridge from September 1911 to August 1916.
In St. John's, Newfoundland, Ronald's daughter, Kathleen Noling, now 96 years old, recalls how her father came to join the war effort.
A message came from the War Office to all the headmasters of schools in England, asking them if they had anybody who would be suitable to be trained as a pilot. And that's how my father got into the Air Force.
He joined the RFC in 1916 and ultimately achieved the rank of flight commander. His brother Wilfred and 3 cousins, Bernard, Eric, and Gerald, were killed in action with the Newfoundland Regiment at Beaumont Hamel, and his sister Dorothy also served as a nurse at the Ulster Volunteer Force, UVF Hospital, Belfast. On the 5th of August 1916, he began his aeronautical training at Oxford, and by the summer of 1917, he was at the Western Front, flying ungainly Martinsyde G-100 bombers with 27 Squadron out of Claymaris North Airfield. This squadron was the only one fully equipped with the Elephant bomber, which one pilot described as sluggish on the controls when loaded with bombs, and its only defense was to dive and zigzag for the line. He played an active role in the Third Battle of Ypres, participating in 41 bombing raids, for which he was awarded the Military Cross in October 1917.
I think that that was one of his characteristics, actually, a very, very strong sense of duty, obligation.
A report of the 27th of July, 1917, reads, Second Lieutenant R.H. Ayre dropped 7 20-pound bombs from 700 feet on a railway station between Courtrai and Oudenaarde, Belgium. This was one of the deeds cited in the Statement of Services for which the award was conferred, as reported in the London Gazette, 27th of October 1917, and reprinted in the Evening Telegram, 17th of April 1918. Lieutenant R.H. Ayre, during a period of 5 months, took part in many successful bombing raids. On one occasion, he bombed an enemy airship shed, and on another occasion bombed a railway station from a height of 500 feet. He derailed part of a train and then engaged the occupants with machine fire. He displayed the greatest gallantry and determination.
Despite his incredible flying career in World War I, Ronald, upon completion of his service, would not fly as a pilot again.
Early after the war, my parents flew to Montreal because the dentistry was better there. Anyway, he said when they took off, he felt he should be pulling back the joystick, you see, to catch the wind. Because, you fly into the wind and then, So, but that's about the only comment he ever made about flying.
Upon leaving the service in 1919, Ronald Ayre joined the family business, and in 1959, he was chairman of the board of Ayres and Sons, St. John's, and a former president of the Rotary Club.
In spite of his distinctive flying career, Ronald may have had mixed feelings about his military service.
He never spoke about his war service. I don't know what he felt about it. What he felt, did he feel he was taking revenge on the Germans when he dropped bombs on them? Because they'd killed his brother and his cousins, and he'd grown up with those cousins.
Back at the Rooms Archive and Museum, Mike sums up our two early aviators who played such a pivotal role in Newfoundland's early aviation history.
Reid and Ronald Ayre are just two of the more than 100 Newfoundland men who served in the Allied Air Forces in the First World War, either as airmen or tradesmen. Both men had distinguished flying careers. Reid is noteworthy as the first Newfoundland pilot to fly in the war, as well as being the youngest officer in the Royal Naval Air Service, and the only Newfoundland pilot to fly in the Gallipoli campaign. Ronald Ayre was the first Newfoundlander to win a major medal for his work as a bomber pilot on the Western Front. Although they represent only a small portion of the Newfoundland combatants in the war, these two men and their colleagues in the Allied Air Forces represent a significant chapter in Newfoundland aviation history.
Erected in 1924 and located at the east end of Water Street in St. John's, stands the Newfoundland National War Memorial. And it was on this site that retired Royal Canadian Air Force Colonel Bill Mahoney would notice a glaring omission.
The Air Force community in Newfoundland has long lamented the fact that there is no tangible recognition on our National War Memorial of the Newfoundland Labrador Airmen who served in the First World War. We always knew that there were some who fought and some who made the supreme sacrifice, but their service was not well documented. However, recently, through the research efforts of retired Warrant Officer William Ford, who has become an active military aviation historian, and Dr. Mike Deal, another prominent military aviation historian, it has been determined that as many as 100 Newfoundlanders signed up for service with the Royal Flying Corps, the Royal Naval Air Services, and the Royal Air Force, and even the US and Australian Air Services. Now, my involvement started on a Remembrance Day, November the 11th, a few years back, maybe 2015. I recall standing on the memorial after the service, looking at the various wreaths and reflecting. My eyes fell to the original plaque that was mounted on the memorial in 1924. I recall being quite startled when I read the words, now this is a quotation, "The memorial was erected to honor the sacrifice of the men who gave their lives by sea and by land for the defense of the British Empire in the Great War." It struck me like a ton of bricks. Not only was the sacrifice of these brave Newfoundland and Labrador airmen not included on our National War Memorial, but by these words, they were excluded. It was then and there I decided this wrong must be corrected. I immediately contacted Veterans Affairs Canada, the province, and the Royal Canadian Legion. But nobody seemed particularly motivated or interested in doing anything about it. The memorial had been there for almost 100 years, and there was never really a serious objection. So, with the support and encouragement of some like-minded individuals in the community, we investigated the possibility of placing a similar plaque to the original on the memorial. We learned that Veterans Affairs Canada would support our efforts, but only cover half the cost. So I agreed to pay the balance. And fortunately, a local sculptor, Morgan MacDonald, who has done some wonderful work in our community, had access to the mold of the original plaque that was used in 1924. Collectively, we designed and commissioned the plaque to be placed on the memorial. And with the permission of the province and the Legion, it was during the Battle of Britain ceremony on September the 21st, 2021, the Lieutenant Governor of the day, the Honourable Judy Foote, and Kathleen Noling, daughter of Captain Ronald Ayre, Military Cross, unveiled the consecrated plaque. So finally, as a province, we honored the sacrifice and bravery of the Newfoundland and Labrador Airmen that served in the Royal Flying Corps, the Royal Naval Air Services, the Royal Air Force, and other Allied Air Forces. It was a great day for the families of those men and for all of Newfoundland and Labrador, as a wrong had finally been corrected, albeit 97 years later.
Howard Reid had been the first Newfoundlander to join an Air Force, and Ronald Ayre, the first Newfoundland aviator to be decorated. As World War I progressed, more than 100 Newfoundlanders would enlist and take to the skies over Europe. They would come from all over the island of Newfoundland and from all walks of life. In future episodes, we will be highlighting more of these Newfoundland pilots and their incredible wartime service. Poetry has always been tied to war and conflict, and it was a young lieutenant pilot of the Royal Flying Corps who would pen a poem to his fellow flyers more than 100 years ago. The Flight to Flanders by Leslie Hutchin. I'm David Hebbard, and this has been the first Combat Pilots of Newfoundland and Labrador. Thanks for listening.
Does he know the road to Flanders? Does he know the crisscross tracks with the row of sturdy hangars at the end? Does he know that shady corner where, the job done, we relax to the music of the engines round the bend? It is here that he is coming with his gun and battle plane to the little aerodrome at, well, you know, to a wooden hut abutting on a quiet country lane, for he's ordered overseas and he must go. Has he seen those leagues of trenches, the traverses steep and stark, high over which the British pilots ride? Does he know the fear of flying miles to eastward of his mark when his only map has vanished overside? It is there that he is going, and it takes a deal of doing. There are many things he really ought to know, and there isn't time to swat him if a Fokker he's pursuing, for he's ordered overseas and he must go. Does he know that ruined town, that old of renown? Has he heard the crack of Archie bursting near? Has he known that ghastly moment when your engine lets you down? Has he ever had that feeling known as fear? It's to Flanders he is going with a brand new aeroplane, to take the place of one that's dropped below, to fly and fight and photo mid the storms of wind and rain, for he's ordered overseas and he must go. Then the hangar door flies open and the engine starts its roar, and the pilot gives the signal with his hand. As he rises over England, he looks back upon the shore, for the Lord alone knows where he's going to land. Now the plane begins to gather speed, completing lap on lap, till, after diving down and skimming low, thereof to shattered Flanders by the compass and the map, they were ordered overseas and had to go.
Research, Dr. Mike Deal. Written by David Hebbard and Dr. Mike Deal. Production and soundscape David Hebbard. Special thanks to Kathleen Noling and Bill Mahoney. Copyright 2024.